Shabbat Shalom. Vayikra deals with all manner of holiness. Tazria Metzora, this week's double parsha, deals with the issues concerning the holiness of what comes out of our bodies. There is much discussion of tumah, isolation and reintegration into society. Tumah is a word of its time, and there is no real modern equivalent. It is a negative word which refers to what one should not do and how to be relieved or made whole after doing it. Tumah is a natural part of life in nature. It is not a bad thing to have tumah, but rather a condition to be corrected. In these parshiot, tumah may be understood to be an atmospheric layer or coating, which is invisible but envelops a person or object, rendering shame as impure. It is a manifestation of life leaching out of a being. Today we think of tumah as more of a mold or fungus, which may not be very visible, but is easily spread. It encompasses not just people, but also objects such as leather, wool, and linen, which were among the few objects known to people at the time. The subject of these parshiot is not about medicine and illness like other illnesses, but rather a specific group of skin diseases which were diagnosed by priests, not medical people. The priest's job was to diagnose the disease, not treat it. An essay entitled The Religion of the Bible, which is found in the Jewish Study Bible, suggests that biblical purity laws are those concerned with situations and circumstances that cause one to be ritually impure and thus not fit to encounter the sacred. An example of this would be a woman's condition after childbirth. In the normal course of one's life, many activities would cause people to contact an impurity. One is required to dispose of an impurity as soon as possible, but an individual is not to be ashamed for acquiring the impurity. If the impurity is not well dealt with promptly, too much of it will accumulate and cause God's presence to depart. Vayikra 13, 1-8, which we read today, describes how God instructs Moses and Aaron in the methods of examining skin rashes and teaching them. Moses and Aaron are the only ones who are instructed on how to diagnose the skin condition sarat, which used to be translated as leprosy, but is now more commonly called scale disease. This is in sharp contrast with other instructions which were given to larger groups of people. This emphasizes that the condition is one of ritual impurity, not medical illness. There was much prestige attached to being seen in the presence of the high priest. This helped mitigate any shame associated with being impure. Also, tzarat was treated quite matter-of-factly and as a natural feature of the world which God created. No moral judgments are based on individuals who are afflicted, particularly if they move promptly to eradicate it. The most common cure for impurity was isolation, in which a person lived outside of the camp for a stated period. Sforno, the 15th century Italian commentator, taught in commenting on verse 14:2 that the isolation site was near the boundary of the encampment, where the priest can come to inspect the afflicted person easily without having to subject himself to special effort. Brachot 19b suggests that people in isolation were well treated by stating that, let us derive a general principle that human dignity takes precedence over all mitzvot in the Torah. There are many rituals which were followed during the isolation period. Re-examinations were done on a weekly basis. Since the person with Sarah lived apart from others, it is unclear how impurity was transmitted to other people and to objects. Fabrics which were contaminated were to be cleaned and isolated for 7 days. The rituals an afflicted person had to perform, cleansing themselves and their belongings, served as rites of passage in which an individual prepares himself to return to society as a normal person free to be in God's presence. The purification ritual was a 3-stage one, starting right outside the camp where the priest announced a person cured. A ritual involving the blood of birds is used on the person. The second bird of the pair used is set free to carry the impurity away. Step 2 happens on the 7th day and extends over a 7-day period when the individual participates in disposal rituals. The third and final step takes place on the 8th day when the Metzora makes several offerings, including a guilt offering. Only then can the individual return to camp and resume a normal life. The Torah stresses not only the necessary isolation of those afflicted with scale disease, but also their rehabilitation. Verse 14:20 states, "And he shall be made pure." Being made pure was a symbol of being whole again and welcome in the community. Thanks to COVID, it has been many months since we lived a normal life rich with human interaction and communal activities. We have gone through various stages of isolation and in our individual ways decided how isolated we wanted to be. Our place of isolation has been our homes, our means of communication electronic. Where once afflicted people were dependent on the Kohen's judgment, we are dependent on a vast web of electronics and cable systems. Fortunately, Zoom and other platforms have allowed us to stay in touch, much as the Kohen's weekly visit kept the Metzora from being totally isolated. Despite this, many of us feel a deep sense of isolation and loneliness. Much as it is now thought that the mold spread disease through the air and on contact, we now know this is how COVID spreads. We were masked to protect ourselves and others when venturing into the public sphere. Thanks to the Rahmanet and science, we now have effective vaccines. Life is starting to open up, a return to the camp from isolation. This situation leaves us with many challenges. How will we ever feel whole again? How will we meet the challenges of opening our lives as individuals and as a community? How will it feel to move about freely, to worship together at 30th Street and go out to eat after? What does the future hold for us? Shabbat Shalom.